Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 6 of Florida Wildlife Advocates. Today, we are very fortunate to have with us the father of the amendment that created the FWC, as well as other key elements of the conservation of Florida. And right now, I'd like to introduce him. That would be the famous Clay Henderson. Hey, Clay, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good. Good to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you, Clay, because you are the authority on Florida amendments as they have to do with conservation, going all the way back to 1998. The first thing I'd like to do is to get a kind of in a capsule, what your life was like from the time that you graduated law school in 1979 and until you were appointed to the Constitutional Revision Commission in 98.
Wow. Well, I can do that. I think that basically I consider New Smyrna Beach my hometown. We moved there from North Florida when I was about 11, and went to high school there and across the county to Stetson for my undergrad work. So that's very much home. And grew up along the banks of the Indian River Lagoon. I think a lot of my classmates in high school were surfers. I was a river rat. As soon as I got a canoe, I was out there in the lagoon and enjoying the fishing, the wildlife, the birds, the dolphins, the manatees, and it's certainly very much a part of who I am. When I came back from law school, I was law school up in Alabama. Came back after 3 years to see just how much my hometown was changing. It was growing too fast. Bungalows on the beach were being replaced by high-rise condos. Traffic was getting worse, and clearly quality of life was suffering. So that is what piqued my interest. There were some of us that got together to oppose a big project on the North Beach, 5 20-story condos. We lost that in the city commission. We filed lawsuits. We went all the way to the Florida Supreme Court, which ruled that comprehensive plans at that time were merely a guide. And that's what really led to the passage of the Growth Management Act in 1985. So that's what really got me involved. Um, and as part of that effort, I met some wonderful people along the way who helped guide me. Walter Boardman had retired to Volusia County. He was the first executive director of the Nature Conservancy. Doc Leeper was an artist who lived in Canaveral National Seashore. She was the driving force behind the establishment of Canaveral. Reed Hughes was an oil man who I was blinded on the road to Damascus and started spending all of his time working for advocacy. So in '82, we worked to preserve some property along Spruce Creek. Went out and raised money, hat in hand, to have the Nature Conservancy buy it. And that was my first contact with the Nature Conservancy and the first time we were involved in buying land. And so afterwards, the chairman of the county council came to me and said, why don't you see if we can come up with a plan to come up with a fund to acquire environmentally endangered lands. And so I was appointed that committee. We came up with a program to tax quarter mil tax increase to bond only $20 million. That was a lot of money back then. And it passed in 1986. Little did we know that that was the first in the country. No one else had done that. And so we went about trying to convince other counties to do the same thing. And, all these years later, over 20 counties in Florida have passed bond issues just like that to raise over $1 billion. So that's kind of how I got started. '86, I was also elected to the Volusia County Council. We worked on a lot of environmental issues. I really got an education around that, and that was a big part. I left the council in '90. 92. Had an unsuccessful run for state senate. Best thing that ever happened to me.
Well,
It
so
was,
so it wasn't unsuccessful, Clay, right?
no, it wasn't. Best thing that ever happened because I can focus on my issues, and that's what I did. I worked for Nature Conservancy for the Trust for Public Land. I was part of the creation of the Save the Manatee Club. Went on the Florida Audubon board, and in 1995 was appointed as the president of Florida Audubon Society. So that's sort of the arc of how I started, and at the point where I was involved in statewide Florida issues.
That would be enough for most people to get all that done and just go into retirement and feel happy that they've contributed so heavily. When you talk about New Smyrna Beach and, the way it was, and that's the way it was when I went to high school also.
Yeah.
Just miles and miles of dunes.
Sure.
And you pull over and go swimming anywhere and come out. And now it's miles and miles of condominiums. Occasionally you see public parks along the way, but
Well,
yeah,
I mean, the good news is that we have Canaveral National Seashore.
yeah.
This last weekend, we celebrated its 50th anniversary. It's 24 miles of undeveloped beach, the largest undeveloped stretch on the Atlantic coast of Florida. It's a wonderful turtle beach. Last year, 17,000 turtles came ashore and laid their eggs. So it's a
Wow.
wonderful thing.
Wow. And a lot of people don't even know it's down there.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a long haul to get down to that point, but it's definitely well worth the trip for anyone who hasn't been down there. So we've got Clay Henderson up to about 1995,
Right.
and when was it that you were invited to be on the Constitutional Revision
That,
Commission?
that was 97, but I think the question is why. We had two other amendments that we worked on during that period of time. One was in 92, which is the net ban amendment that was passed. It's almost hard to believe that before that passed, that people, I mean, these commercial fishermen would go out there and string gill nets all the way across Mosquito Lagoon, and all the fish that they couldn't sell because they weren't commercial fish just died. And so it was just such an incredible waste. Dolphins also getting caught in those nets. It was just awful. That passed overwhelmingly. And then the Everglades amendments. George Barley from Orlando pushed to amend the Constitution to tax sugar to help pay for the cost of Everglades restoration. That was taken off the ballot by the Supreme Court. And then after George died about the same time I came to Audubon, and so John Mills and I came up with the Everglades amendments for 1996. There were three of them. Two of them passed. The tax on sugar did not pass. But at that moment in time, it was the largest, the most expensive campaign in Florida's history. Over $100 million was
Wow.
spent on that campaign. So I had two constitutional amendment campaigns under my belt at that point. And then in 1997, Lawton Childs, who was governor, called me and asked if I would serve on the Constitution Revision Commission. And I said that what a wonderful once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So that's how that happened.
Yeah, for those who aren't familiar with the Constitutional Revision Commission, that meets every 20 years, correct?
Right, right.
And how many appointees were there back then?
There's about it's a little over 40, and I think to your point, Florida is the only jurisdiction in the United States where there's every 20 years a review of the fundamental constitutional document. It's interesting. It was an idea of Thomas Jefferson's. He thought that constitutions should be subject to fairly regular review, and the results of that go directly on the ballot. It doesn't have to be approved by the Supreme Court. It doesn't have to be approved by the legislature. So it's an an awesome responsibility. And people, the 40 or so who were part of that, appointed by the governor, the Supreme Court justice, president and Senate, and Speaker of the House, these were people who had tremendous amount of experience in Florida government. I was, I was a rookie. Might as well say I was a kid. I just turned 40, and had not been Chief Justice of the Supreme Court like some of these other people.
Yeah, well, it's very fortunate that you were, but in that span of time, when did you start meeting? A year or so ahead of time, 2 years?
Yeah, no, it was about a year and a half effort. We were assembled in May of '97. We worked. We did public hearings all across the state. We got a tremendous amount of input, and then began our meetings. We met in the Senate chambers, and then in early '98, we started generating, the actual proposals, and then whittling them down. That it was more than a year-long process.
And during that process, you took the lead, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, on Amendment 5
Right.
that appeared on the ballot in 1998.
Right.
Let's talk about that because it's such a far-reaching amendment. For those who are unfamiliar with it, there is not, and correct me if I'm wrong, Clay, but there's not the single subject rule
Right.
constraint on amendments that come out of the Constitutional Revision Commission, correct?
That's correct. There's no single subject rule, but what we wanted to do with that is to unite the four proposals basically under the umbrella of conservation. So there were four parts we'll get into. One was an aspirational statement.
Yeah. What was that aspirational statement?
Yeah, it would be the policy of the state of Florida to protect, that adequate provision would be made by law for the conservation of our natural resources. When the Constitution was passed in 1968, environmental provisions really hadn't started being passed yet. So there was only a little bit in there about it was like there shouldn't be excessive noise, or water pollution. So we took it to that next level. When we did our public hearings, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of people that came to these hearings that were held literally from Pensacola to Miami. And at every stop, people came forward and said, we have to have stronger provisions for protection of the environment. Many of them called for a public right to clean air and water. But there wasn't enough support for that, but there was for the aspirational statement. The thing that had the most support was the continuation of bond financing authority for land conservation.
Let's talk about that because that in and of itself provided millions of dollars for the purchase. Billions of dollars for the purchase of fee simple purchase, right? Or was it conservation easements also?
It was in that time it was mostly fee simple. Back in 1980, actually 1990. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. Governor Martinez came forward with a proposal that he called Preservation 2000. And it was a 10-year, $300 million year program that raised $3 billion for land conservation. And but the authority for that bonding expired in the year 2000. So there was a lot of pressure on us to be able to extend that bonding authority. And so that was the other thing that we did in that amendment, Amendment 5.
And that was, was there a cap on the bonding authority or just the ability?
No, it was, the nice thing about it is there was no cap. It is indefinite. There's no upper end. And it also includes not only land acquisition, but also be able to need to use dollars for restoration. So you're talking about things like the St. Johns River, the Indian River Lagoon, and of course the Everglades those are billions of dollars of restoration needs. So
You
all
know,
that was included there.
when you look at Florida Forever and Preservation 2000, that was Preservation 2000 was by Bob Martinez, who was a Republican, right?
Sure, and Florida Forever uh, was Jeb Bush. Um, the amendment passed in 1998. Jeb Bush was elected governor, and he made the passage of Florida Forever one of his priorities, and basically cut us loose to help design the bill. I worked very closely with then Senator Latvala to craft the bill, and then we worked it through the legislature. So it was heady times, to be sure. And Florida Forever, another $300 million a year program for 10 years. It did not do the whole 10 years. I'm sure we'll get into it in a minute because of the recession, but it at least started out that way. So between the two, there were about 2 million acres of land that were purchased under P2000 and another million or so acres under Florida Forever.
You know, if you were to go back now and have to rebuy all the land that was purchased under those two programs,
Right.
even though it was billions over time, you have any idea of how much it would cost in today's dollars to buy that?
I just can't imagine. I mean, when you look back at that little bond issue that we passed in Volusia County in 1986, we that was only $20 million. We ended up using that money to acquire about 100,000 acres. You couldn't do that today.
Yeah, just the foresight of government, Florida government at that time was, we were very fortunate, let's say, to have Reuben Askew,
Sure.
Bob Graham, Bob Martinez, Lawton Childs, and you have to kind of tip your hat to Jeb Bush there on Florida Forever and getting that kick started, because the amendment provided the authority to bond, correct? It didn't say, okay, you're going to spend $300 million a year and buy conservation land. So that's another element. Those are the two elements. There was
one more on land acquisition before we get to
sure. Let's hear it.
conservation, and this one has been very important. And there was concern in the conservation community that we were going to go out and buy all these millions of acres of land, and that some future legislature or governor and cabinet or whatever would have a better use for that land, that they'd surplus it and then it's not protected. I mean, we promised the voters that this would be protected in perpetuity. So we put in there what we ended up. There's a lot of compromise that went on, but the provision says that land cannot be surplus unless the governing board, by a supermajority vote, determines that the land is no longer needed for conservation purposes. Now, the truth is that has been a very high bar over the last 20 years. There have been a lot of proposals that have come through for surplusing property for some nice things, some nice ideas, but it's proved to be a bar. But in the last year or so, we've seen some shenanigans going on with that. The split oak is an example. The decision, the proposal to put hotels on state parks, the early decision by the governor and cabinet to offload part of the state forest for a golf course. I think we've caught them now. The sunshine is shining brightly on them. So the amendment is still, for the most part, doing what it was intended to do.
Yeah, that the bar that you created under this Amendment 5 in 1998, that it would have to be determined no longer needed for conservation.
Right.
Is there a conservation parcel owned by the state or by conservation easement that's no longer needed? I mean,
Well,
how's that possible?
no, it's not. And the example, we talked about how Florida Forever continued under the 8 years of Jeb Bush, and also continued under the next 4 years under Charlie Crist. But then the recession hit in '08, and it crippled Florida economy. And actually, that's when Florida understood just how dependent that it is on development. I mean, it's a sad story, but it's our tax structure is totally dependent upon building and development. So the bottom fell out of the market, and so the concern was that there wasn't going to be enough money even to pay the bonds on Florida Forever because no one was buying real estate. So that's when it stopped. But then we elected Rick Scott in 90, I've lost track. What year was that? 2010.
10.
And the first thing that he wanted to do was to kill off state parks that weren't making any money. Then the second thing he wanted to do was to go through all those conservation lands and figure out what we didn't need and sell them off. And guess what? They did that, and they were all needed for conservation purposes. They didn't sell off. I don't think they sold off a single acre. So, but
They tried.
Yeah. But during the Scots governorship, no money was spent for land conservation. So.
Yeah, that kind of leads us into the kind of the backlash against that,
Right.
which ended up being Amendment 1 in 2014. Now,
Right.
The history of Amendment 1, you very well laid that out, that there had been bipartisan agreement that the state money should be used to buy conservation land. And then we went into the Rick Scott era, and the kind of concept of let's run government like a business. And even though they're two different words, and there's a reason why they're two different words,
Right.
but that was that. So a group got together. Who were you with at that time? Were you with Audubon or?
No, by that point, I was back to practicing law. I was with a law firm of Holland and Knight, which has a long history in Florida. Holland, who was the founder, had been both governor and senator. He was very conservation minded and was the sponsor of the bill that created Everglades National Park. So the firm decided to lend me to the cause pro bono to help draft the amendment and to defend it before the Florida Supreme Court.
Okay, and that was in
13 and 14.
2013.
Yeah.
Okay, because I know I met you when I was with the league, and
Yeah.
then we kind of rolled into the signature gathering
That's right.
phase of that, and so many groups. Audubon, I think, collected the most signatures, and the league second, and I think Sierra Club third. And if I got that order wrong,
No, I think that's right. I mean, we were able to, the environmental community as a whole would be, the memberships of all those organizations. We got our first 100,000 signatures fairly quickly, but then we need to reach out beyond our group. And so one of the things, I mean, I worked, as you know, I worked really, really hard to get the league to come on board. And once the league did come on board, they were stalwarts, and that's where the next couple of 100,000 signatures came from. It takes about 1 million signatures. You have to gather them in about a year, and so we were able to meet that threshold, just barely, but we did.
yeah, and that was put on the ballot. I think at that time it was the most number of volunteer signatures that ever been collected.
No question about that. I mean, we had to get 950,000 verified signatures.
Yeah, and that's only becoming more difficult, and we're kind of looking at special session right now to make it damn near impossible.
The legislature hates the initiative process. They hate voters telling them what to do.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about another amendment that got on the ballot. this past session and kind of circumvented all that. But so Amendment 1, 2014, it gets on the ballot,
Right.
and there's a resounding knock against it. And I'm going to play a little clip here. This comes from a PBS interview with Eric Eichenberg.
An amendment to the Florida Constitution is up for a vote on next week's ballot, championed by former Governor Bob Graham. Amendment 1 looks to ensure water and land conservation projects are adequately financed by committing 1/3 of Florida's real estate documentary stamp tax revenues to protecting the state's environment. The Florida Chamber of Commerce opposes Amendment 1, claiming it will tie the hands of the Florida legislature in the event of an economic downturn in the future. Joining me to discuss this is Eric Eichenberg, CEO of the Everglades Foundation, who is in support of Amendment 1. Eric, good to have you at this table.
Thank you, Helen.
What about the issue that is raised by the chamber, which says you are binding the hands of the legislature with this constitutional amendment?
Well, first let me say that this amendment received over 1 million Floridians signing petitions to put this on the ballot. It's also a bipartisan-led effort. You mentioned Senator Graham supporting, Governor Graham. It's also supported and been endorsed by former Republican Attorney General Bill McCollum. So this has been a unifying issue, bringing both folks from both political parties together. But I would submit to my friends at the Florida Chamber of Commerce that this is an opportunity. This is a chance to actually give the legislature a mechanism to ensure that our conservation, what makes this state so great, which makes Florida beautiful, a chance for legislators to, in fact, put the dollars toward these programs that are so vital to the continuing growth of our Florida.
Why does this have to be on the Constitution? I've heard people who are real supporters of environmental projects say, this is great, but this is really legislation. It doesn't belong in the Constitution.
Well, if it does pass, which I hope it will, voters hope will support this come Tuesday, and votes have been cast already. But if it does pass, the Florida legislature is going to be responsible to implement it. So members of both the House and Senate are going to have to come together to figure out what is the best way to, in fact, spend these dollars. Dollars that are not raising taxes.
But aren't you bypassing the legislative process by doing this? Because this should be legislation.
Not at all. The issue here is we soon become the third most populous state in the Union. We're back to a growth state. Our economy is much better than it was even a few short years ago. So as Florida is improving, we have to ensure that we have clean water. You know, 1/3 of the population of this state rely just on the Everglades for drinking water. So by ensuring that we have enough water, a quantity of water, plus a quality of water, it enables us to grow and enables us to have economic prosperity as we go forward. Tourism, agriculture, those two top industries that lead this state rely on water, and we have to ensure that it's clean.
But to go back.
Well, there you have it, Clay. That was the argument at the time. You're bypassing the legislature. This is the legislature's purview. What happens if we get into another recession? So what was your comeback? Because I know you went in front of it was the fiscal committee or something like that. Didn't they argue the same thing?
Well, they did, and our argument was that we provided a list of things that this money could be used for: fee and less than fee, protection of water resources, environmental restoration, like the Everglades, historic preservation, recreation, passive recreation, outdoor recreation. So the obvious thing is that the legislature in the appropriations process gets to determine the allocation of that money into those pockets, and that was our comeback. Legislature at the end of the day will have that and still has that authority.
And when it went to the ballot, and when it went to the voters overwhelmingly, I think it was 75%.
It was 72%, and there were counties where it was well over 80%. It was an overwhelming mandate. I mean, you think about it, it received millions of more votes than whoever was elected governor or senator that day. So it was something.
Yeah, and after it passed, and
Yeah.
I know all of the groups were like, all right, finally we're going to, get Florida Forever funded again at $300 million. And the legislature, I know because I was up there and appeared and made public comment about how the money should be spent, according to what the groups behind it thought. And I remember someone outside of the committee, after the committee went into recess, said one of the senators said, "I'll be damned if this group's going to tell us how to spend that money."
That's right.
So there was kind of it was a little raw there.
It was very raw. The legislature didn't want us to tell them their business. And so in the 15 session, they were very clear. They spent only a few dollars, I mean, nothing, almost nothing for land conservation. They then did what they called a revenue shift. They used the money to pay for the salaries for all the park rangers and all the forest rangers. We bought a whole fleet of cars and GIS equipment and computers and culverts on roads. I mean, they figured out whatever they could spend the money on, but for. And I kept saying, I was saying, you know what? It'll catch up. It'll be in the end of the day, it's going to be all right because they're going to run out of things to spend money on, and they're going to have to start spending it on what was intended, and that's essentially what has happened over time.
Yeah, that thinking evolved, and I guess that's one good thing about term limits is the people who were sore about that termed out, and then you had a fresh new crew come in. Every couple of years you have a new Senate president, and
Sure.
then just within the past few years, the funding has actually exceeded, right, the $300 million that we were looking for.
It has, but even in the early years, the legislature earmarked dollars, $200 million a year for the Everglades, which translates into $2 billion, $50 million a year for Springs, and $2 million toward the Lake Apopka restoration. So that started out with those earmarks, and of late now we have a new addition to that, which is the restoration efforts of the Indian River Lagoon. So that's close to home for me and very important. But the thing that's happened that has changed in the last several years is that the legislature has gotten excited about this concept of a Florida wildlife corridor. Many years ago, we started using GIS maps to try to see how we could connect the dots, how we could create linkages between the existing conservation lands that we have, and basically create a pathway where if you're a bear or a panther, you could actually walk from the Everglades to the Georgia border along conservation alleys. And so the legislature has gotten behind that. And so these last several years, they have appropriated hundreds of millions of dollars toward the completion of this effort. It's important to note in the context here that Amendment 1 is the largest voter-approved finance measure in our country. In the 20 years that it is in existence, we have 10 years left, it will raise in excess of $20 billion. The number keeps growing because Florida continues to grow. Housing value, real estate values continue to climb. And so it's producing more and more money. It produces basically $1 billion a year now, which is significant.
And to go to your point about development funding the purchase of conservation land, it was a third of the documentary stamp tax on deeds was supposed to be allocated to this fund?
That's correct. And that's so when you go to buy real estate or a house, you pay a documentary stamp tax based upon the value of that house, and it is collected at closing, and it's 1/3 of that total amount of money is dedicated toward those conservation purposes in Amendment 1.
So, for a lot of us at the time, in 2014, after it passed, and we were like, yay! And then the next year it was, oh, we'll show you, basically.
Yeah, all right.
And I think that happened like 3 years in a row, right?
It did, yeah.
It was like 8 million, 10 million, back
Yeah,
to 8
nothing.
or something like that. It was nothing. And but now, I wonder if it's because it became an initiative, for instance, in this last session of the Senate president to fund this wildlife corridor, and because it's not Amendment, nobody's talking about Amendment 1 anymore, but
Right.
because it, somebody can lay claim to it now from the current legislature or the most recent legislature, that it becomes popular again, right? It came full circle.
It really did, and I think it did because we reached a water quality crisis about 6 years ago. We started having massive algal blooms in the Indian River Lagoon, Lake Okeechobee, the Caloosahatchee, manatee and dolphin mortality. People got sick of, millions of dead fish and next to their $1 million homes. And so we elected officials, the legislature and even the governorship, that were committed to try to make things better. And so I think that's how we got full circle, is that the public said, we got to do something. We have the money to fix this. Why aren't we doing it?
Yeah, let's talk about water issues for a second, and I'm going to play a clip here.
Well, my name's Clay Henderson, and I've lived almost all my life in New Smyrna Beach on the north end of the lagoon. Hard to describe what I do. I've done a little bit of everything, but mostly known as an environmental lawyer, and the last 5 years I've been teaching at Stetson University. My relation to the lagoon is an avocation. It's personal to me. It's home to me. And so I guess I've really been an environmental advocate for most of my career, and there's always been an issue associated with the lagoon that's needed some good advocates. Advocacy is the essence of our work as Americans. It's the way we interface with government. It's how we influence policy, how we influence our elected officials to respond to needs. And advocacy in the case of the lagoon are people coming forward, stepping up, letting their voices be heard for what we need to do to protect it. This is our home. This is our special place, and we need our elected officials to respond to that call. That's what advocacy is. I'm a river rat. I grew up on the banks of the lagoon. I've lived almost all of my life on the lagoon. All of my friends took to the ocean with their surfboard, and I had no interest in that. My interest was always wading along the banks, doing a little bit of fishing, canoeing back in the backwaters, in the mangroves, watching the manatees and dolphins and wading birds. It's always been part of my life. And when we first moved here, I remember wading with my dad in the water. He bent over, pulled out an oyster, pulled out his pocket knife, opened it up, handed it to me, and said, "Here, try this." And it's 6 decades later, I can tell you how salty that tasted. It was a memory that's been with me all along, that, we're part of the lagoon and the lagoon's part of us. It's not about a city or a town or a place. It is just that connection to the lagoon, that sense of place that permeates everything else. So it's home, and you fight the hardest to protect the things that you love. When my house was built in the early 50s, it, like all of the others, you flushed the toilet, it went straight in the lagoon. We didn't get what we now call wastewater treatment plants until the early 70s, and they weren't, in that early fashion, they weren't even enough to treat the waste as it should be. That didn't come until much later. We have over 250,000 septic tanks along the lagoon that leach in various ways into the waterway. So for us to build our cities along the coast, we had to drain the land. And in doing so, we've expanded the watershed, and so that expands the area for all these nutrients and things to find their way into the lagoon. And then that's not even counting the problems in South Florida, which are even more critical because they're connected to the much larger plumbing systems of the Everglades, the connections to the St. Johns River. So all of us, I would say collectively, if we all do a better job of our personal stewardship, that would move the needle faster than anything else. One of the things that we need to do as a community is to do a better job of informing folks that live along the lagoon or use it, recreationally or otherwise, to know what good stewardship looks like. If you live along the lagoon, you shouldn't mow your lawn right up to the water's edge. You shouldn't put fertilizer on during the summer months. You shouldn't put herbicides down within so many feet of the water. You should be careful about gasoline and oil spills. All the things about your own home are critical. Every little bit of waste that finds its way in the lagoon stays there for a very, very long time. So there's a lot of things that we can do personally on a very specific level, and beyond that, other things such as just conserving water and energy, because those are all things that as a whole contribute to the problem. I really like this concept of one lagoon. So we all know what's close to us, what's close to home. And the idea of one lagoon is that not only are we all in it together, but that the issues that we're dealing with from one end to the other are all variations on the same. If we pull all together, look at it as one lagoon and not 5 lagoons, we're going to do a better job of protecting it. My greatest hope for the Indian River Lagoon is that we exceed everybody's expectations when it comes to restoration. We'll see clean water, we'll see it in a shorter period of time, and people will be able to celebrate the outcome that we've really accomplished something.
That was good.
Yeah. Did that guy look familiar?
Yeah. It's good.
Yeah.
That's the value of good editing.
Yeah. The clean water is something I know you've worked on for a very, very long time. And I got a chance to work on it in the 2020 charter review cycle, and we put an amendment on the ballot here is a charter amendment, the right to clean water. And it was interesting that when it passed the Charter Review Commission to put it on the ballot, the next day the legislature preempted it. So it just shows you how powerful that concept was. But as you were saying, this is not something new. This is something that people were saying put into the 1998 amendment, correct?
That's right. And in the most recent Constitution Revision Commission, same thing. Many people came forward wanting some kind of right to a clean environment in the Constitution. There are about 6 states that have that in their Constitution. I would say that Florida has all of the governmental structure necessary to do the right thing, but it has not acted. It has not acted in such a way that is consistent with that. I mean, most people would not believe, because we live in a beautiful state, most people would not believe that nearly all of the surface waters in Florida are considered impaired under the Clean Water Act. They're not suitable for fishing or swimming.
Yeah, it's definitely something that is an unsolved problem now, and it's not as though we don't have the technology
Right.
to deal with this issue. It's do we have the political will? And I'm hopeful that just like the way Amendment 1 passed, and, it was kind of shot down by the legislature, and then somebody in the legislature said, hey, I've got a great idea. How about let's clean up the water?
Yeah.
And it becomes the, Senator whatever
Sure.
bill. So I think that's, Amendment 1 is a good foreshadowing of what could happen if, some enterprising legislator wants to really make a lasting legacy for himself or
That's
herself.
very true.
One of the other things that we didn't discuss about Amendment 5 in 1998 was you put in there the creation of a Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission.
Right.
And what was the thinking behind that?
Florida, is different in a lot of respects. It's a diverse state in terms of think about the Gulf of Mexico, Atlantic Ocean, salt water, fresh water. In the early days, say the 20th century, all hunting and fishing rules were done by the legislature, and it was extremely political, as you might imagine. Governor Holland, back to Holland again, he proposed the creation of an independent constitutional agency that became the Game and Freshwater Fish Commission, and that passed in 1948, I believe. And so Florida is the only state in the country that has an independent, constitutionally authorized commission to deal with fish and wildlife. Now, the problem was between 1947 and 1998 that we had a freshwater fish commission, and then all saltwater fishery issues were handled by something called the Marine Fisheries Commission, and their rules had to be ultimately approved by the governor and cabinet. The reason why it wasn't a million then, but the reason why the net ban got on the ballot, passed overwhelmingly, is because the system we had in place there with the Marine Fisheries Commission and the governor and cabinet was incapable of protecting saltwater resources. There was for years, there was no requirement for a fishing license. For years, you had the gill nets out there taking everything. I sort of thought that commercial fishermen would fight over the last fish in the sea. If you give them that chance. So and then the other thing is that we just have these mixing zones. The St. Johns River is a river, but for its last 50 miles, it's an estuary. So is it saltwater or is it freshwater? And so you had all these things that were confusing. So what we wanted to do was continue this concept of an independent constitutional agency, but that it would have plenary authority over both freshwater fishing and saltwater fishing, but not just fishing, marine resources, marine animals, marine plants. And so it would have full constitutional authority to pass rules for the protection of all wildlife. And the thought was that it's independent, if you get it out of politics, and they could make decisions based upon science. And of course, I can say all these years later, maybe I was a little naive about that. But that's how it was set up, and that's with the system that we have now. And then on top of that, this new constitutional provision, which gives a right to hunt and fish, probably only makes it worse.
Yeah, and, I'm glad you brought that up. That was Amendment 2 back in last year, 2024, the right to fish and hunt, right?
Right.
And that said that people had not only a right, but this was going to be the preferred means of responsibly managing wildlife. And it also made traditional methods of
whatever
fishing
that
and hunting.
means. Yeah.
And I guess who decides that, Clay? Is it the courts or is it the legislature decides that?
Well, ultimately, the commission will decide what those traditional means are, and you can bet that will be challenged one way or another in the courts. As you said, the thing that was most egregious to me was a statement that hunting and fishing would be the preferred means of protecting or managing rather wildlife. No, the preferred means is often to not hunt them or fish them. And so, they just got it totally backwards. And so it's no surprise that in their first meeting after the passage of the amendment, that the commission's directed staff to come back with a plan to resume bear hunting, which was an incredible, stupid idea when they did it a few years ago. It was badly handled, and it just caused tremendous amount of reaction because people were just disgusted with it. And I think you're going to see that same kind of outpouring again.
Yeah, let's watch a clip, and this is exactly about what you were just talking about.
Problem in Florida, and the state is now taking steps or the state rather is now taking the first step towards a bear hunt.
Today, Florida's Fish and Wildlife Commission directed staff to come up with plans for a hunt. People for and against hunting bears talk with the commission today. Supporters say it would help manage the state's booming bear population. Opponents want non-lethal options and say hunts don't reduce bear interactions with humans.
Over the eons, man has hunted bears, and occasionally a bear has hunted a man. And if we're going to have a natural distribution of wildlife, it is important that we use man in the picture.
The Humane Society of the United States and the humane community, we oppose trophy hunting. Certainly, we oppose black bear hunting.
FWC's staff are expected to finish drafting their plans for a hunt by May. Florida's last bear hunt happened in 2015. Now, this year, Florida passed a law allowing people to shoot bears on their property if the bears are threatening them. Big Bend State Representative Jason Schiff sponsored that bill. He pointed to a rise in bear sightings in Franklin County.
Check this out.
Yeah, that last part of it about HB 87 that empowered a person to shoot a bear. It started out that you shoot a bear if it broke into your house and it was going crazy, right? And that was the initial attack that they took on it. And then it was like, well, the bear could go crazy and out in your yard and tear up your porch. And okay, damage your property, okay. And it kept going on and expanding out, and then they included, if a bear goes after your pet. Well, dogs and bears have a history.
Right.
It's not a good one. And it goes back millions of years, and there was always going to be a problem between dogs and bears when the dogs are not on a leash. And we see this happen over and over again. Oh, a bear injured a dog. Well, what happened? The dog wasn't on a leash. The dog went after the cubs. And a lot of times it's a female bear protecting her cubs. And, that somebody could shoot that bear, because it went after an unleashed dog is just incredibly stupid. Now, we were talking about this, this amendment and what it's empowered people to do, and also how this all falls on the Florida Wildlife Commission. But
Right.
In its first meeting, Clay, in December, after this passed, one of the commissioners says, let's have a bear hunt.
Right.
Staff come back with design a hunt for us. Now, is that the way that you envisioned the FWC to operate?
Oh, not at all. I mean, one of the questions that was raised when this proposal came forward was where are we on the population study? And the answer from the staff was that the population study is not due to be released until a few more years down the road. So, if we were doing this based upon sound science, we would know the bear population statewide, but most importantly, we would know the population in each of these sub areas. And that's where the issue is. There are a few places like Wekiva where there are a lot of bears, but then there are other places where there are not that many. And so if you're making a decision based upon science, you need to have that data, and they just seem to be rushing to judgment on it.
Yeah, and shades of 2015, when there was a hunt back in 2015, but at that time at least they had the data. There was an increase in the number of what they called nuisance calls, the
Right.
core complaints. There was an increase. It was pretty steady. You could see that. There was also an increase in road kills, and and then they had the population study. Okay, so you say, all right, under that circumstance, let's have a hunt. They had a hunt in the first day. Close to 300 were killed in the first day, and
Right.
they were saying no. Before the hunt, they were saying no, it's going to be about 28 a day. We'll be killed. No, it was almost 10 times, more than 10 times that. So the design of the hunt was poor. The selling 3,700 licenses. And the way it was kind of like a rush, get your bear now before we reach the max, and then we're going to close it off and call in and find out if it's been closed off.
Right.
To this day, everybody says, 304 bears. That's the official 304 bears, but we had monitors at the check stations, and if you extrapolated out what the actual number killed were, it was showing, at least on my calculator, to be over 500. So did everyone who shot a bear check it in? Did everyone who shot a bear and killed a bear, were they killed instantly, or did they go off in the woods and die at some point? So
we don't know, and never will know.
Never will know. The important thing that I wanted to get out from you about on this particular subject was your intent, because you were the author or primary author of this amendment that created the FWC.
Correct.
And where it is now. And it seems to be, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to be a political arm of the governor's office.
Well, it's true. The governor appoints the commissioners, and in the last few administrations, these people have been user groups, or hunters, fishermen, but also business people, developers, golf course people. This is you don't have any scientists that are there to balance that out. So no, we've gotten away from the intent. The intent was that the commission would have ability to obtain data and use that data to make judgments on balancing the interests, but based upon science. And so it's gotten away from that, and it needs to get back to that to be able to build integrity with the public, I think.
There are efforts in other states to require that at least some of the members have at least some kind of educational experience in wildlife ecology or biology. What do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely. And unfortunately, it would require a constitutional amendment to force that in Florida, but a governor can do that. A governor can appoint these people, has discretion to do it. And we hope someday we'll get some people on there that can help achieve that balance.
We have another election coming up in a couple of years.
Right.
Hopefully that'll be
we'll ask them those
one
questions.
of the issues. We'll ask those questions. Now, before I let you go, Clay, let's talk a little bit about your books.
We got 2 books there. We run out of time, so let's get them up there. The first one was something I just really needed to do. It was my COVID project. Not that one, The Forces of Nature, which is it's a history of the land conservation movement in Florida, beginning with the Florida Federation of Women's Clubs in the Everglades, the protection of Everglades National Park, the state parks that grew during the CCC program, and chronicling this incredible effort to protect about 11 million acres of land. So about 32% of the state is now in conservation, and this tells how we did it. Then the other one is just a nice project to be involved in. This is Audubon's Birds of Florida. It goes with an exhibit at the Daytona Museum of Arts and Sciences, where we have 90 original 200-year-old Audubon prints of Florida birds, including most of the birds that he drew while in Florida in 1831 and 32. And this book has beautiful reproductions of the paintings, but also tells the story of the Florida expedition by John James Audubon, which is probably his most significant expedition, where he discovered new species that we all now take for granted, like this beautiful flamingo.
Now, there's another picture in here.
There we go.
Look at that young guy there on the right.
That's right. Well, he was even younger. I was a 19-year-old kid that drove this guy around North Florida in my mother's 1974 Valiant. And we spent a lot of time in the car together talking about what it's like to grow up in the rural South. And he was the first politician that ever said, "I'm an environmentalist." And he meant it. It was part of his soul. And if you asked him what was the most significant thing he did as president, he usually didn't say Camp David Accords. He said, well, one day we doubled the size of the national park system. He was very keen to that. Alaska wilderness really is his legacy from a conservation point of view.
That's great. And, his passing is something that was inevitable. We see these giants leaving us one at a time. Just recently, Buddy McKay passed away, and then I believe it was last year, Bob Graham.
Bob Graham and Nat Reed a few years before that. These were all giants.
Lawton Childs quite a while back, but they're one by one leaving us, and we have to, in my opinion, foster a new generation of Clay Hendersons. And,
well, I tried to do my part. I had a lot of wonderful students come through my classroom the last 5 years, and I hope some of them go forward and make a difference.
Well, I know they're out there somewhere, and it's a long, hard road coming up through the ranks. Definitely running for office or county commission, et cetera. And I know here in Orange County we have a couple really, really good environmentalist commissioners that are doing great things.
Right.
So I think that's all a credit to you, that there is a path. There's a path coming through law, not necessarily through law, but coming through law, coming through politics. And as you said, and you told me at the time when I ran for state senate and lost, you go, Chuck, you're going to be better off.
That's right.
You're going to be better off. And, it's an entree into a world that is unbeknownst to most people. I mean, especially now, to go out and raise the kind of money that you have to raise. And fortunately, I'm never going to do it again. I don't know. Does the future hold anything for you, Clay?
Oh no, I'm happily retired. I'm continuing my writing, and that's I just feel it's very important for me to get a number of these stories written down to document some of the successes that we've had and things that we've learned. So I'm still working on that.
Yeah. So there's another book in the making.
There will be, yeah, and it's I'd call it lessons learned. When you look at some of the things that we've done here, I think that there's there's gonna be a number of lessons that we can apply going forward here and almost anywhere else. So that's the idea.
Yeah, and we have a couple comments that have come in. Sherry, very nice, commenting on how great it is to have you on this
Happy to be here.
podcast, and Shannon also. And you know, we need you to hang around, Clay, and you know, don't forget about Florida. We have some issues going on again with this you know, proposed bear hunt, and also the clean water issue, and that's going to be with us forever.
Sure.
I believe. But you know, so thankful for you to be on today, Clay.
Happy to do it.
I know we've been friends for a long time, and you know, pulling you out of retirement here to be on this podcast, I appreciate your time. And you know, people don't forget Clay Henderson. You just had a book signing, right, in Daytona, and how many people did you say were there?
There were 160 people there. I signed books for an hour.
160 people coming to a book signing.
Yeah.
I mean, that really says something in Florida in today's day and time.
That's right.
So, well, thank you so much, Clay, and we'll keep in touch, and maybe even have you back on as we get further down the road on some of these issues. So once again, thank you everyone for another great episode of Florida Wildlife Advocates, and we'll see you next Thursday at 6 p.m.